What's up? Howdy. Ah, Minnesota's been nice. I've been here since Thursday. Yeah, it's been real nice weather. Even though it's been dry, we've been able to go out and find some mushrooms. Um, it's exciting to not be talking about mushrooms for once. I'm mycologist foremost in my career path, so I spend a lot of my time traveling and teaching people about mushrooms. And when I was invited to this event, I saw it as a beautiful opportunity to speak on some of my other passions that led me down my career path. So yeah, this is Intro to Metaprogramming the Human Biocomputer. So I'll give a little bit of background on myself before I dive into this, and it sounds kind of complex. I was, I'm operating a 1994 model biological computer here, and I was born into a beautiful African American family, very educated. My grandfather was a English professor, and he taught me English very early on from a Latin-based root, which was helpful for understanding the world in linguistic symbols. And I grew up traveling. My mother works for the Department of Agriculture, Foreign Affairs, and my father was in the military, so he traveled domestically and she traveled internationally. So I spent a lot of my time in and out of various cultures, in and out of various school systems. And I decided to drop out of school at the age of 16 because it was interfering with my education. I took it upon myself from then to start learning about things that I thought would be beneficial for my own existence and things that I was passionate about. So I spent some time learning about cannabis, a lot about cannabis and cultivating it. Then I started to learn about mushrooms and cultivating them. I had some interruptants from the justice system. And then my son was born, so I didn't want to go to jail or anything like that for my passions in Pennsylvania. So I started to use my passions and the techniques and skills I had developed to pursue legal pursuits. But how I figured out to do all of these kinds of sciences as a high school dropout was through taking a step back and removing unnecessary programs that I was operating in my biological computer just due to lack of consciousness in my entity. My grandparents were very consciously aware of me. I lived with them for 4 years when I was younger. My mother was in college, and my father was off chasing women in New York City. God bless his soul. My mother spent her whole career working really hard to raise me and my brothers and sisters. She adopted 2 of my siblings in Mexico and had 2 with my previous stepfather. My father was, had his attention in his own pursuits. So a lot of, after my grandparents passed away when I was really young, a lot of my consciousness for my own entity was on myself. It's easy for consciousness to be adverted when there's advertisements all over the place, especially when you're young. So I had accumulated a lot of programs from the cultures that I was experiencing that were not beneficial to me, or not beneficial to me or my family. So we'll talk a little bit more about what this means. If we could go to the next slide. I don't know who's operating that one for me. Cool. The human biocomputer. The human biocomputer is a term coined by John C. Lilly in 1967. John C. Lilly wrote a book on the human biocomputer. John C. Lilly was also the inventor of the float tank, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we move forward. John C. Lilly did a lot of experimentations with LSD and sensory deprivation and also communication with dolphins. So a lot of really interesting work there. And the float tank experience, you know what? I'll just talk a little bit more about the biocomputer and then I'll talk more about the work. So understanding ourselves as a biological computer. This term started to be accepted and understood more as computers became more of a commonplace in the household of the average person. Now that we're walking around with computers in our pockets, most people that are in this room or of my generation can understand some amount of technological language, which becomes beneficial when understanding how our brain is very similar to a computer, or a computer is only a representation of our brain that lacks consciousness operating it. That's where we come in to operate the computer, program it to run tasks and routines and things like that. So yeah, our brain is pretty much a computer. When it comes down to coding, our brain, we have some innate programs that come with our DNA, with our intuitive instincts. But with children, a lot of times we have to teach them how to operate. With my son, when he was really little, I'd have to tell him to grab something with his hand and put it in his mouth. And the programming becomes more complex and more complex as we get older. Open the door, go outside, walk down the street, open the mailbox. All of these things are very similar to how you would program a computer, very rudimentary type language. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is my entrance. This was my entrance point into understanding the biological entity as a biocomputer. I came across this book probably in 2011, 2012, and I was really spun out at this point in time. So I dropped out of school when I was 16, and I came back to the United States. I was living in Taiwan when I dropped out of school. I came back to the United States, and I wanted to grow weed in California. So I started growing weed in Pennsylvania, and in my dad's house in a closet. And he was working in Afghanistan, and he got word that I was growing weed in my closet. And he was like, when I get back, if that's in there still, I'm gonna get rid of it, or you better get out, and da-da-da-da, a lot of threats and all that kind of stuff. He's a great guy. I love my dad. This is teenage growing up kind of growing pains type situation. But yeah, so I decided to move out. I was 17 years old. I got my own apartment, and then on my way to move my cannabis plants to my apartment, I got pulled over by a K-9 unit and, learned a little lesson there about doing that kind of stuff in Pennsylvania. So anyways, down my line of experience, I started to experiment with mushrooms, and then I started to experiment with LSD. And I would always research the substances before I would consume them because I was really afraid of hurting myself. I grew up with 2 government parents. I grew up in the DARE program and all that kind of stuff. I thought substance would kill me. I grew up in the church. So I thought that I would be really harmed by these substances. But I also was very interested in science, so I would look at the science of it and understand what the lethal dosage of it was, because I also grew up with Google very accessible to me, so I knew that I could find any information that I wanted. So I was really tripped out when I found this. I was taking LSD on a bi-weekly basis. I think I was 18, 19 years old, and I had found some research from Sweden about LSD. So I started taking it on a bi-weekly basis and taking the time to comprehend the experiences that were happening to me before I would take it again. So sometimes it would be more than 2 weeks because I couldn't understand some of the things that were happening. But in between one of those bi-weekly experiences, I walked into this metaphysical shop, and it was almost like there was a light shining on this book. I brought it to the counter, and the lady was I opened it first, and in the inside it was initiation into the Brotherhood of Light or something like that. And growing up in the church and already being tripped out, I was oh man, I'm already on the edgy stuff. I might go to hell from some of this stuff I'm doing already. I'm already eating the mushrooms, the devil's probably in me and stuff like that. I had to get over that. It was freaking me out. But so anyways, I put the book back, and the lady's why'd you even touch that book? And I was it looked like there was a light shining on it. And she was like, if you had any call to that book, then you should really get into it. So in the introduction of this book, it says it's the biocomputer keys to our consciousness time zone, and it has a bunch of keys that have whole descriptions behind them explaining where it's kind of like GPS pinpointing yourself in space and time, recognizing yourself as a conscious entity. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is a really good reference for this kind of stuff. I know I only have a short amount of time, so I wanted to leave you guys with some good references as I tell the story, so that you guys can follow up with this afterwards, because this is a very complex topic. So for those of you that are living in a more fast-paced life, that other book that came out in the 70s has predicted so much modern science. In the Keys of Enoch, the author even put a pyramidal grid map of the world where pyramids should be, because all pyramids are lined up in a grid all across the world. And some scientists utilized the book to discover the pyramids underwater off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, I think in the 80s, in the 90s. So yeah, really cool stuff in there that was delivered. That book, I wouldn't even say that the author wrote it. It was a delivered experience through multiple dimensions of space and time. So this one was delivered in 2011, and it utilizes more modern language that could be digestible for younger audiences. And this one's called The Overself Awakening. And a lot of these texts are just helping us to understand that we are conscious and we are operating in multiple dimensions of reality, but a lot of our cultural conditioning in growing up in this space-time has convinced us that we're locked in these physical bodies in 3 or 4 dimensions of reality. Could we go to the next one, please? So consciousness, recognizing ourselves as conscious energy bodies operating biological wetware. So this is where you can start to getting into the metaprogramming part, and programming and metaprogramming. Right now, a lot of us are susceptible to being programmed by television programming, by school programming, by media. If you're not consciously operating your biological entity, you're going to be susceptible to being programmed externally. And it's America, the United States of America, is predatory in understanding that this is reality. We have to understand that now that psychedelics are becoming decriminalized, our government knew what it was doing a long time ago before they allowed this into the general public. I would recommend that you look into MK Ultra experiments, look into One Who Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. He was just a regular American dude that went into a government experiment and they gave him LSD while a bunch of scientists were studying him. None of the scientists recognized that he was the most conscious entity in the room once they gave him that substance, and he managed to get a bunch of it out and drove the merry pranksters all across the United States doing acid tests on people, giving a lot of the public LSD, which is the reason a lot of us have health food stores and yoga around our communities. In all seriousness. It's the whole reason that I even got here. There was a lot of people along the way that just like left the keys along the way, left the crumbs along the way, because they were, being aware of the next generations. So yeah, recognizing ourselves as conscious energy bodies that are operating our biological wetware through the nervous system, through electrical impulses and electrical signals is how we operate our biological wetware. Through my work with mushrooms, we're doing a lot of work on neurological function through hericium species of mushrooms and psilocybin mushrooms and truffles, tuber species of mushrooms. We can induce adult neurogenesis. So as a child's brain's growing, there's constant neurogenesis, which is creating new synapses and creating new neurological connections. If a child is sat in a room doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again throughout their experience as a child, they're less likely to remember their experience, and they're less likely to have connections between the left and right hemisphere of their brains physically. You can do physical scans, and you will have less physical connections between the left and right hemisphere of your brain if you're stuck in the same patterns all the time. I think this is part of the reason why I was able to escape a little bit better, because I can remember my whole life, I was never in the same spot. I moved almost every year. There was never a time where I was in the same space more than 2 years. So I have a lot of different things I can remember throughout my life, and a lot of different cultural experiences, a lot of different languages that I was exposed to and things like that kept my synapses happening. And then I started doing psychedelic substances when I was 15. I started using cannabis. and that propelled me even further. I don't recommend that this is for everybody. It's just my own experience. If we create communities that are more conducive of individuals having conscious experiences, then kids don't have to go out and try and figure out all this stuff. I wouldn't have had to try and do all of these things and bring all of this science in my community if it already existed there. So we can go to the next one, please. So some of the methods of recognizing yourself as consciousness and then utilizing your consciousness to program your own brain is through meditation. Cannabis and meditation really helped out for me because my body wasn't working whenever I realized that I wanted to be conscious. I had been eating American diet for my whole life, and my bowels were completely destroyed. There had never been, by the time, when I was 17 years old, 18 years old, I went raw vegan, and that was the first time in my whole life that I could take a poop every day. My whole life. I was hospitalized like 3 times from the diets that I was eating, but my parents weren't able to recognize. They just listened to the doctor, tell him, this is the medicine that your kid needs to take. This is his problem. But they don't tell you why the problem happens. This is the same thing for all kinds of illnesses across the board. So my parents are just thinking, oh, Will has a problem. It's not the diet that we're eating, because they were all eating horrible diets, and they still eat horrible diets. But it wasn't until I put my diet in my own hands. And I don't recommend everybody go raw vegan, but it was like going to that blank state, and then I went vegan, and then I went vegetarian, and now I'm an omnivore again. But I know which foods make my body not work because I went to a blank slate first, and then I tried the things. And when I was sensitive, because I was tripping and I was high all the time then, when I would eat the foods, I could really feel what it did to my body because I was more sensitive of myself at that point in time. When you're so desensitized, salt, sugar, porn, cigarettes, all this stuff, you can't feel anything anymore. So that's why you want the strongest stuff, the most refined things, refined sugar, refined cocaine, refined THC hash oils, because you can't feel anything anymore. You're so desensitized. So you want to become sensitive again so you can feel what the heck is making you not be sensitive. So I started to use cannabis to make myself feel more sensitive and to make myself feel grounded in my body and make myself feel comfortable, because there was a lot of anxiety around existing here in this space-time. And for me, cannabis relieved my anxiety. It's not like that for everybody. There's different avenues for different people. Not everybody is able to handle the psychedelic experience. There's sometimes for each community or for each family, somebody that can go really far into those experiences where some people in the family cannot have those experiences at all. But because somebody in the family had those experiences, it's able to translate to the other people in the family. We're not nuclear, we're not individuals, and especially with our family, we're able to communicate and express. Your family, you can communicate with them. We use English and shit to talk, but with your family, their body language and the way you speak with them and the way you communicate with them is better than anybody else. Even if you don't like them, even if you have a hard time communicating with them, you guys can understand each other better than anybody. So to be able to have those experiences in the way that it expresses off of you, sometimes they don't even have to have those experiences. I've had experiences so hard in my community and for my family that it rippled out, and now there's people doing nerdy science shit all around me that probably didn't even trip out as hard as I did. So float tanks are also really good for people that don't want to have psychedelic experience or trip out really hard, because what will happen in the float tank is there's a lot of salt in there, so you're very buoyant, and it's the temperature of your body, so you can float without putting any effort into it, and then you stop feeling your body because it's the same temperature, and then your consciousness can start to feel free-flowing because your body is it feels like womb vibes, you're fully taken care of, and you can let go. You can close it and remove the light and remove the sound, so you're just free to let your consciousness float around. One of the other things that I really recommend is, I think it's called Lucia Light. Has anybody ever seen this or heard of this before? It's really crazy. It's expensive, but I don't know if y'all can get it around here. If somebody comes with a festival and you can find it, or if you guys can pitch in as a community to get it. Really, really great way for individuals to have these kinds of experiences without psychedelics. You just close your eyes or put a light little thing over your eyes, and it flashes a bunch of lights at your eyes, just white light at really different rates. And you can do it with music listening and all this kind of stuff, but the rates of the light flashing makes your brain produce images and stuff like that. You can trip out. I saw angels and waterfalls and stuff like that when I was sober on probation on urinalysis. I didn't have nothing in my body. I was just getting lights flashing in my face. Yeah, probation sucks. Good thing I'm done with that. But yeah, psychedelics are also really helpful for it's really powerful medicine for bringing yourself into the present moment, realizing that time is nonlinear, realizing that conscious energy that operates your body is not locked into temporal space-time. Can we go to the next slide? Remote viewing. So this goes into this. Remote viewing, recognizing that your consciousness is not temporally locked into your body. But you have to feel comfortable. You can't just be like in the middle of like a city and be projecting your consciousness out of your body. You'll be looking like crazy, like your body be like seizing out with nothing operating it, or just like laid out on the floor or something like that. Like you might be the most conscious entity in the whole area, but like to everybody else in the public, you look like a fool flopping around. So make sure you're in a safe space. Make sure you're surrounded by crystals, because there's all sorts of Wi-Fi and radio signals and all this kind of stuff perverting the lower heavens that'll be in your way as you're getting outside of your body. So when you start to operate your energetic body, there's a lot of energetic disturbance in the modern world that you're going to come in contact with. You don't have mommy and daddy telling you this is how you cross the street when you start taking psychedelics and going into different dimensions and shit like that. There are other entities out there, and in the lower heavens, they're not always pure. And in the lower heavens, there's a bunch of weirdos that are rich that are running around with their consciousness able to operate into these kinds of realms and stuff like this. So you guys need to be careful when you get out there. Because, again, there's no mommy and daddy telling you that's a stranger and this is how you walk across the street. I had weird alien shit happen to me. Be careful, guys. Get your crystals and get with your community and stuff like that, and make sure you're in the right space. You can't just be doing this kind of stuff anywhere, willy-nilly. And so out-of-body experiences also are very helpful for recognizing that your consciousness is non-local. We have non-locality, the ability of being non-local with our consciousness. There's a lot of governments, there's a lot of militaries, specifically the United States military and the Russian military, that have done a lot of research into remote viewing and have utilized psychic humans to discover downed planes in different countries and things like that, 2T with GPS pinpoints. So there's a lot of research on this already. This is Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher. She's passed away. I was able to meet her back in 2015. She co-authored this book, Mind Dynamics in Space-Time and Time, and she was a physicist at I can't remember what university in California back in the 70s, and she has worked for myriad different organizations, including NASA, and wonderful human, and brought a lot of light into the world of remote viewing and bringing it into the public. So can we go to the next slide, please? I'm going to try and wrap up here for you guys. Routines and subroutines. We have innate routines and subroutines that are coded into our DNA that help us from dying just in a basic situation. Like I tell people in all my talks that human beings are the ultimate scientific tool designed by nature, and we are more evolved to understand symbolic language over auditory linguistic structures. You can understand this by babies being able to recognize emojis and things like this at a young age before any kind of other language. A baby can tell that a sharp tooth is scary and that sharp claws are scary. It's innate in our DNA for protective routines and subroutines. We have learned routines and subroutines that if you are not conscious, if you do not have a conscious family, these learned routines and subroutines will come off of the screen programming. So that we want to have conscious families, more conscious individuals that have freed themselves up enough that their energy can be around them and around their families and their communities, so that the learned routines and subroutines can be more conscious. And then we get into meta-programming, where you go beyond, and then you can start programming yourself, programming your culture around you, and getting into larger scale, dynamic, 7th-generation type thinking when you can free yourself from your temporal space-time lock. Can we go to the next slide, please? Codes. There are codes that our DNA and our consciousness recognize through space and time. There are certain sound codes that ancient humans, ancient Vedas, sat in caves and on the top of mountains and chanted and played with bells and whistles until they heard the vibrations that made their consciousness do different things because they were sensitive and they were not distracted. So there are certain sounds that have been coded. I will like to tell you that we are reaching a singularity point. Time is about to change for every conscious entity in space-time. Space-time is going through an upgrade. So the old ohms and things like that, they're going to be upgraded like when your computer changes to a new operating system and it doesn't use the old ones anymore. Those things can get us so far, but to operate and communicate with divine intelligence, there's new linguistic structures that are being developed right now. We are the architects of a new dawn. We are the architects that are building a new cosmology of consciousness, and it is up to us to discover and create those new symbols, those new sounds, and those new codes that brings us into connection with divine intelligence. There are some visual ones that we call these mantras. We can utilize these in our head. We can write these out into space. And then there are energetic codes that we can utilize, and we're starting to see now through light, frequencies, and sound that we can regenerate our own bodies. This is the way Rupert Sheldrake talks about the morphogenic fields. We are being controlled by energetic fields around us, but we are conscious entities that are capable of controlling those same energetic fields. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the goals: active neurogenesis, keep your brain actively creating new synapses, actively creating new neural pathways, and then active self-programming. I hate that meme, those memes that's like, this shit lives in my mind rent-free. Fuck that, nothing lives in your mind rent-free. That's your mind, that shit for you. Keep that shit for yourself, active self-programming. Don't let anything in there that's not you, for you and for your family. Maintain your energy. You don't spend money, you spend your time and energy. It's the only thing that has been given to you by nature. You're not spending your money, you're spending your time and energy. Make sure you know what you're worth. Make sure you take that. I hope everybody can take some of this energy with them and can perpetuate some active self-programming into the future. Many blessings. Let's give another round of applause.